live. Let's just appreciate this score by Daniel Pemberton real quick. Hello, my name is Ben Friedman here from the Beniverse movie channel, and today, in honor of one of my most anticipated movies in quite a while, I am talking about the film Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse here today on the Beniverse movie channel. In case you do not know me, I am a film critic. I write for such publications as Highbrow Magazine. And today, just on my channel, I wanted to talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, all spoilers, all reviews, Easter eggs, cameos, and I also wanted to do something else. I wanted to rank all 13 of the Spider-Man related movies. This includes everything from Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and of course, guys like Venom, guys like Morbius, and of course these animated films. I'm including Miles Morales in there. So thank you all for watching, and we're just gonna jump right into this right now. So sorry, I'm still getting used to the idea of being live. It's a really weird concept for me. So bear with me as I get some of my bearings across. Hey all, let's talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And I just want to say right now, this is going to be a spoiler-free review for a hot second. In the fact that, what's it called? Sorry, realized I still have the music running. This is going to be a spoiler-free review for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse for about the first 5 to 10 minutes of this. Then it's all spoilers. I'm not holding back. I'm going full spoiler details on this movie. But let's just start with what Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is about. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse starts off basically where the last movie left off. We follow Miles Morales as he's now been Spider-Man for a few months. I think it's about a year since Into the Spider-Verse happened. And he is struggling with it because he doesn't have his friends anymore. He's pretty much a loner. He's a little disconnected with the family. They can't understand who he is because they don't understand that he's Spider-Man, and he's afraid to tell them that he's Spider-Man. And apart from that, the only people that would understand are in different multiverses / dimensions. And he's struggling with that. He ends up getting involved in this basically multiversal chase that involves the characters of Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, and it involves some people from his past, including Spider-Gwen, played by Haley Steinfeld. And there's this moment where Spider-Gwen comes to whatever galaxy / universe that Spider-Man is a part of, Miles Morales, this Miles Morales that we know. And basically, after a confluence of events, they end up together. They end up together in this multiverse, and they're now kind of trapped, and Spider-Man is discovering his place in the multiverse and how it exists. Meanwhile, he's attacked by this villain named The Spot, who has this really interesting history with his past, and The Spot basically threatens to destroy the inner workings of the multiverse as we understand it to be in this movie. That's a really complicated over description of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Really, all you need to know is this movie is about Spider-Man growing and learning what it means to be Spider-Man and what that requires of a human being, and struggling to relate to people. It's a very personal story focused around Miles Morales again. And what I like that this movie does so smartly is in focusing on Miles Morales. Of course, you get the typical just fun that we had from the first Into the Spider-Verse movie. You get the humor that is just bursting through the screen. I mean, this is Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who've worked on the Lego movies, 21 and 22 Jump Street, Mitchell and the Machines. They know how to do comedy, and they know how to do it very effectively. And this movie is very funny. In fact, it's like insanely funny. There's a lot of just good visual gags. There's a lot of meta in jokes in this movie. There's some great addition of comedic characters, including one of my favorites, which is Spider-Man, Punk Spider-Man, I believe is actually what he's called, voiced expertly by Daniel Kaluuya, who is just laugh out loud riot throughout. Andy Samberg voices a character, Ben Riley, the Scarlet Spider, who is just used to expert effects in this movie. And this movie, like I said, this movie's very funny throughout, and it still has that same kind of irreverent humor that the first Into the Spider Verse has. But this film is significantly darker than Into the Spider Verse, and it's the story is far more serious, but not in a way that feels serious for serious sake. This movie earns its darkness, and it earns it very well. What I liked about this movie is it takes its time. This is a movie that has been advertised as having 200 plus Spider-Man, and it does. But that could have been the gimmick of this movie. The focus of this movie is still Spider-Man in Miles Morales, and specifically Gwen Stacy. And I think Gwen Stacy is actually a really interesting character to dive into in this movie, because she is the reason this movie works for a majority of its runtime. Haley Steinfeld voices Gwen Stacy in this version, as she did so in Into the Spider-Verse as well. And what they do so well with the character of Gwen Stacy is they give her an arc. She is, without spoiling much, she is the character that they really focus on. They give her a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you know anything about the Gwen Stacy storyline, it very heavily involves her father, Captain Stacy. And what I love about it, and I'm trying again not to go into too many spoilers right off the bat, but Across the Spider Verse starts with Gwen Stacy, and we follow this 10 to 15 minute sequence of Gwen Stacy basically being brought into this Spider Verse league that protects the multiverse. And it's a very heartfelt story. It's a very, I found myself thinking this is the first movie done expertly in 10 minutes. And that doesn't negate what Into the Spider Verse does. It's just so impressive how much story they are able to pack in to 15 minutes, and you fully understand everything that is going on. The animation in this film is exceptional. And specifically, when we start with this Gwen Stacy animation, they use watercolors to just amazing effects. Uh, every iteration of Spider Man has its own art style, movement, and color palette. And then for the case of Gwen Stacy, it's very watery. It's a very watercolor based. And so you get to really feel the emotions and atmosphere of this movie come through the colors. And it's just something so beautiful to behold. And I was just left so visually stunned by this. And this is the first 10 minutes of the movie, and the movie only gets better from here. And it's just, it brings you right back into this world, and it sets the tone, it sets the stakes. But in focusing this film a little bit more on Gwen Stacy, it allows how this film's to play out. It allows it to feel satisfying, because without saying too much, this film is a part one of part two. And I hope that is not spoiling anything for you. They advertised it originally as Across the Spider Verse part one and then part two until they changed the sequel title to Beyond the Spider Verse. But for all intensive purposes, this movie is the beginning of something. And I left a little just like going into this movie. I shouldn't say I left. Going into this movie, I had mixed r- feelings about this movie. I love the singularity focus of the first film, that is a complete story. And I was a little worried, how are you going to do a part one and part two without the story feeling stretched? At the end of this movie, I never felt that the story was stretched. I thought this movie was handled pretty perfectly in its just timing and its pacing. And by the end, all I wanted to do is, when the movie ended, I wanted to walk into Beyond the Spider Verse right away. And I think that's a testament to this movie's quality. This movie works because Sony just trusted their filmmakers. This movie goes crazy. This movie goes crazy hard. It is throwing references left and right. It is fast paced, but it never feels convoluted or confusing. You are in this kinetic energy ride from beginning to end. And I loved everything about it. The new additions of this movie are really good. Spider-Man Punk, played by Daniel Kaluuya, as I mentioned, is really just exceptional. Jason Schwartzman deserves a lot of love for the villain, The Spot, who's really the primary antagonist of this film. He goes from a little goofy, because his character is inherently a little dumb sounding, to just full on intimidating as the second half of the film rolls on. Oscar Isaac is just Oscar Isaac, and he's just so incredible in this film. I mean, just truly menacing in a way that I found so enjoyable. And everyone else in this film really gets a moment to shine. Shamik Moore as Miles Morales continues to be really just great in this role. Haley Steinfeld, as I already mentioned, Brian Tyree Henry, who plays Jefferson Morales, who again I thought was just exceptional in the first film. He gets a little bit more to do, but really the focus of this film goes actually to Jefferson Davis's, it's now Jefferson Morales's his wife, who I'm trying to find the name of the actress, Luna Lauren Velez, who plays Rio Morales. She is exceptional in this movie. There's that one moment in Into the Spider Verse where Jefferson Morales has this conversation with Miles, where he's telling him, "You're the best of us. I see the spark in you." And in this scene, she gets the mother talk to Miles, and it is so heart wrenchingly beautiful. I found myself tearing up heavily. It's one of my favorite scenes. It's so beautifully animated and it's so perfectly brought to life. And it's what makes this movie special is the dynamics of these characters. It's not the multiversal storytelling, even though that is done exceptional. It is truly just sitting here with these characters and feeling empathy, feeling the emotions, feeling the Miles Morales storyline come to life. I just really loved it all, and it really worked for me in an exceptional way. Some other new additions are Issa Rae as Jessica Drew slash Spider Woman, who I thought was very good, though a little underserved in this movie. She kind of gets reduced down to the mentor who's kind of always scolding Spider Gwen, and Karen Suni, who is, I don't want to fully reveal who Karen Suni is. He, for those who do not know the actor, he plays Dopender in the Deadpool movies. He comes in for a really fun role in this movie. Shea Wiggum plays Gwen's George Stacy in this movie to really good effects. Like I said, this movie is just really exceptional. The color work in this movie, you could take any shot of this movie and frame it, and it'd be absolutely beautiful. It's incredible to study. There's this scene really early on involving a classic Spider-Man villain where he comes in from a different dimension, and you instantly just are aware of what they're about to do and the art style that they're approaching it with. And you're just like, oh my God, they're blending like 50 different art styles all into this one movie. And it never feels loud. It just feels impressive to watch. I really just was swept away by this movie. And I'm about to go into the spoiler review for this, but to just put a cap to my spoiler free review, I just want to say this movie's exceptional. I love this movie. The second time watching this movie, I found it even more rewarding. You notice so much more. The second time, I really was just focusing in on the color, the backgrounds, just so much life that is brought to screen through the colors, the atmosphere, and it just brings so much to the emotional arcs of these characters. And it does so much of the heavy lifting without being in your face. I really, really love this movie. I listen, Into the Spider Verse is my number one film of the 2010s decade. I don't know if I can get beyond the Spider Verse, the higher rating than this. To be honest, they're both 5-star reviews. Both of these movies are getting the 5 stars. I don't know if I prefer Beyond the Spider Verse over Into the Spider Verse, but the fact that it is living up to the expectations that the first film set and in some ways exceeds it, I'm just absolutely thrilled. The first time watching it, I was like a little struggling with some of the pacing and some of the character motivations and some of the lack of emotional arc. And I also didn't find the comedy to be necessarily as enriching as it was in the first movie. Second viewing, I had none of those issues. I think all those issues were actually really well sorted out in the second time viewing, and you catch so much more. You just catch so many of the little jokes that just it's a joke a minute. And if a joke doesn't hit, another joke hits exceptionally. Really love this movie. It's getting the 5-star review from me. But with that said, let's do this. I'm about to turn this on. Spoiler warning, you are being warned right now. I am going into full spoilers on this movie. Starting with this, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is a part 1 of 2. And this movie ends with a part 1. It has a cliffhanger ending. We find out that Miles Morales has been transported back to a universe that is not his own, because as we find out earlier in the movie, he gets bitten by the spider from a different dimension. That spider that bites him is not supposed to bite him. It comes through the multiverse, through the machine used by uh, Kingpin. And so when he gets transported back, he is now in this universe where Jefferson Morales is dead, where his uncle, voiced by Mahershala Ali, is back, and where Miles Morales is the Prowler. It's an incredible just plot twist that what's so brilliant about it is seeing it the second time. There's so many visual cues that you don't pick up on. Just the look of the world. It has a little bit more of a graffiti art style to it when you enter this world, symbolizing more of the Uncle Aaron influence on Miles's life. Even the jacket color is different. When he puts on the jacket when he's about to talk to his mom, that's a different color. It's just so many of these small visual cues that when it happens, you totally realize it. And they set it up so well at the beginning of the film to lead to this just incredible twist. And I just found myself just like, oh my God, what is going to happen? What are they going to do? And I love the just Miles facing off with Miles. And this film very much ends on Haley Steinfeld's character of Gwen Stacy, who I already hinted at was kind of the protagonist of this story, and she very much is. She gets a complete arc. She has a first act, a second act, and a third act. The first act follows her leaving her dad because he finds out that she is Spider-Man, Spider Gwen. And second act is her running away from him, her realizing what she has done, what she is doing to Miles, basically everything that Spider-Man 2099 has been preaching is to this degree BS. And now the third act is her coming to terms with her father, having this moment, and then realizing that what she shared with her father, that's all that Miles Morales has to do to save himself and save his father. And that maybe this idea of canon, that these tragedies have to happen, is not something that is necessarily true. So she assembles a team. And my God, when this scene comes on the screen, I was flabbergasted. This was tears, joyous, just feeling of just this musical cue. Real quick, I'm going to play a little bit of this music again by Daniel Pombertim. It's the score. The final score of the movie is "Start a Band." And let's just get to this last thing, which is it's a cue from the first part of this movie, the Across the Spiderverse intro. We're getting this band back together and they're all coming in, and we now see everyone who's a part of this team. You have obviously Spider-Gwen, you have Peter B. Parker, you have Spider-Punk 2099. Actually, I don't think he's in this scene, but it's pretty much implied that he is going to be one of the guys saving Spider-Man. This visual effects that this movie are doing, this actually reminded me a lot of Babylon last year, where it's just so much just energy rushing through on top of the score, and just these colors, just this kind of frenetic energy that I just so vibed with. And you get all of them. You get Haley Steinfeld as Gwen Stacy. You get Karen Suni, who I alluded to earlier. He's Spider-Man India. You get obviously you get the inclusion of Peter B. Parker, but you also see some of the other people that we didn't see as much. We see Penny Parker, who is seen briefly earlier in this movie. She's coming back, but that also means who are we going to get to see a little bit more of? We see Spider-Man Noir and Spider-Ham, voiced by Nicolas Cage and John Mulaney, respectively. And it's just this energy, and they don't have any lines, but you just feel it is the band coming back together to save Miles Morales in this universe. And they're all there, they're all standing, and it ends with Miles, we're coming to save you. Cuts to black, to be continued. I was just floored at this ending. I just wanted more. I wanted to experience this movie. I wanted to see Beyond the Spider-Verse then and now. I just so was in love with this ending and this energy that it hits you off. It hits you off on such a high note. And this works as a cliffhanger, one, because it is using the convention of comic books. To be continued is very fundamental in comic book storytelling. They hit that convention very strongly in this movie that this feels like a comic book. If you notice, there are issues that keep appearing on the screen where it is showing almost like this is this chapter, this is this chapter, this is this chapter to be continued in the next issue. I loved how they used the formatting of comic books to this film's benefit. I just found it just so endearing, and this ending to be continued, just bam, snap. I was just left just wanting it. I wanted to see Beyond the Spider-Verse then. Just I just couldn't get enough of this world. And to end it with that, I was like, God, I can't believe I have to wait another year to see the conclusion of this story. But it just got me so excited. And for people who are making this argument, because I've seen this on some Reddit sites, I've seen this from some commentators where they are like, okay, but this movie really isn't a complete story and that it doesn't have a finale and makes it kind of weak. You're an idiot. I'm just so sorry you're an idiot. And I'm sorry you cannot engage with the medium of film and storytelling to any great degree. But if that's what you think, I'm sorry. I just don't really care about your opinion or your thoughts on this movie. Because one, the conclusive nature of this story is Haley Steinfeld's Gwen Stacy character, who again has a beginning, middle, and end. Miles Morales' story is left to be open, and it is a storytelling choice to leave it on a part one and a to be continued. And I don't think that's a cop out by any means. So many great films have a part one to be continued feel to them. The Lord of the Rings, Dune, Back to the Future, Empire Strikes Back literally has a cliffhanger ending. And I think a cliffhanger ending can be used to pretty wonderful effects if done right. And I think this movie does it so right. I just loved how this film approaches itself and how it just is able to achieve something so great and so monumental in its ending, where again I'm just left kind of floored by it. And I'm just trying to pull up some of my notes. I'm having some difficulty. Here we go. What I loved about this cliffhanger ending, and I think what some people are complaining about, and I've seen it actually kind of compared to Fast X recently, which again, spoiler alert for Fast X. I didn't know I'd be doing this on the podcast. Fast X ends on a cliffhanger, literally a quite literal cliffhanger, where Dom Toretto is literally flying off a cliff, about to explode. And you know Dom Toretto is going to be fine in the sequel. You know none of these stakes that they set up. You're like, okay, it's about to get resolved in the first 2 minutes of it. What this film does is it doesn't rush its finale. They could have ended this film maybe, and they could have really rushed it. They could have saved Miles's dad. They could have stopped the spot, but it wouldn't have felt deserved, and it would have felt very hacked and rushed. This movie's already coming in at 2 hours and 20 minutes. And what I liked about the cliffhanger, it wasn't a cop out because the stakes felt palpable. I felt the stakes. I didn't leave the movie thinking, is Miles about to die? Like, obviously he's not, but what I did feel is, how is Miles going to return home? How is he going to get out of this situation? How are they going to find him before Spider-Man 2099 happens? Are they going to be able to save Miles Morales' dad? Every character's danger feels real and very time sensitive, and that just gave it so much just emotion and kinetic energy in it. And like I said, it also works because of the story arc to Gwen and her arc kind of lending a finality to this ending without compromising Miles' story and allowing the final hour to be a film and not cannon fodder. Because I think it could have been so easy for this film to just become cannon fodder. But it's never that. This is never a part one. Oh, wait till see what happens in part two, in the sense that I'm like, oh, okay, I left with an incomplete movie. I did feel like this movie can be watched completed the same way I can watch Empire Strikes Back. Now, if this movie was to, if we had never gotten the part three, or I guess part two, I would be like, okay, this isn't a conclusive ending. But it's the same argument I would make for Empire Strikes Back. If we never got Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back would have a definitively terrible ending. And we don't think Empire Strikes Back has that bad ending because we've seen Return of the Jedi and we know what happens. At the time, I'm curious what the discourse on Empire Strikes Back. And to be honest, I think the discourse has gone significantly stupider on film analysis since the 1980s versus now. So I'm sure the discourse actually isn't as stupid and toxic as it is right now and just so non engaging with the art form. But here's the thing, trust your story writers, trust these guys. They've delivered now 4 great hours of Spider Man filmmaking and storytelling that I trust them to make this choice. I don't understand the idea of like, oh, this is what the MCU is doing, or this has no stakes. And I'm just like, no, because these are very two different storytellings. I saw someone compare this and they were talking about it, and they're like, this is the Rick and Mortification of uh comic books and Spider-Man and all this. And I'm so tired of this. And I just want a grounded Spider-Man movie that is fully of it to the earth, and you're dealing with the relationships of these characters, blah blah blah, and you don't have to deal with this multiverse. And I'm just like, then watch the Raimi trilogy. Those films exist, and I'm glad that this film does something different. I'm glad that this film takes risks, and I'm also glad that this film is willing to do some of the hard work. There is an ambition to this film. What I liked about it is the filmmakers never felt restrained in their storytelling. I love that they took this multiversal story, but also deconstructed this multiversal story, the faults and failures of multiversal storytelling. The aspect that I found most engaging when watching in this film, and I couldn't really talk about it in my non-spoiler review, but what I really loved about this film is what I found so engaging was this idea of canon, because the idea of canon is literally spoken aloud in this movie, and it's the whole point of Spider-Man 2099. There is this canon. There are these things that happen to Spider-Man. There are the good things, like the falling in love with MJ, uh, the weddings, all that stuff, the friendships, and then there's the bad stuff. There's Captain Stacy's dying. There's the Uncle Ben's with great power comes great responsibilities. There's the being broke, all that. And it's the ideas of these are the fundamental things that make Spider-Man who Spider-Man is. And Miles Morales is not that, because he is not Spider-Man because he can't go through certain things of this. He is this anomaly, as Spider-Man 2099 keeps referring to him. And what I found so engaging about this storytelling is it is reflecting on that, and it is saying these are the constraints and restraints of telling a story that must hit all the beats and tropes that are deemed canon. And this film really spends the time exploring that, and just how much less interesting the story can be if we just know that Miles Morales' dad has to die. If we just accept that to be what it has to be, and there's no change, there can be nothing different to that, because then it is not the true Spider-Man story. What these creators in Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse are doing, they are saying, like, no, let's not accept that. Let's accept that there is something different, that we can do something challenging and creative with this to make something new. And it is both a love letter to Spider-Man and all the Spider-Man movies, because I really do feel like the filmmakers have a reverence and respect to all of the Spider-Man movies, characters. You can see it. They have references to Tobey Maguire. They have visual cues to Andrew Garfield. They show Tom Holland some love in this movie. They even show guys like Venom love, the Tom Hardy Venom movies. It is showing, it is a love letter to Spider-Man in the culture that he exists in the context of the comics, of the TV shows, of our history of Spider-Man in media. Uh, it has visual cues from Steve Ditko in the 60s. It has just all these different Todd McFarlane, just all these guys kind of coming in line, and it is referencing, it's very self-referential in its understanding. It is both commentating on art and how, comic book inspires Andy Warhol and the pop minimalist movement, and then how that then inspires that generation of comic books, and how that then inspires Raimi to make Spider-Man, and then how that visual language of filmmaking for comic books is then used in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and then how that Marvel Cinematic Universe dictates the video games, and how the video games are influenced by the TV show, and the TV shows influence the movies, and Tom Holland is inspired by all of this. And this first Into the Spider-Verse is a commentary on all of that in a visual representation of all these movies, but then it's even slinging a bigger web on and on. And it's just like now Across the Spider-Verse is commentating on Into the Spider-Verse, all these other movies that are in Spider-Man. All of this sings. It is all in harmony in the sense that this is all communicating with each other. It is all the history of Spider-Man coming alive. And to understand this movie, you have to understand All of this, if you are creating it, but to enjoy this movie, you can just watch it and just kind of be impressed by it. There's so much just greatness of this movie and this idea of the canon. I love that it is both exploring this internally within the context of the story and just also saying, like, listen, like maybe the Marvel Cinematic Universe, just this idea of like canon and like what has to happen in this multiversal storytelling. Here is like what can be great about it. And then the greatness is getting Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, Tom Holland all together on screen, getting that energy and having that fun. But there's also downsides to that. There is also the struggles of we have to hit the canon, we have to do this. And it is the context of not just Spider Man in the MCU, Spider Man as a whole, but also just modern day filmmaking and storytelling. So it is both a love letter to Spider-Man, but it's also an acknowledgement of the issues inherent to telling a Spider-Man story and the difficulties of that. And I love that this film is so self-aware of that. I love that this film is actually trying to engage with its topic and medium in a really interesting way. It is an art piece in the sense that it is commentating on the times of film. And it's just a love letter to all types of film. You really do feel just the inspiration that they have on it. As much as I've just talked about how this is influenced by the language of Spider-Man, pop minimalist, Andy Warhol, all these just Sam Raimi, Mark Webb, Tom Holland, all these guys, it's also influenced by animation style artwork, art throughout the centuries. You see this vulture character that is called Leonardo da Vinci, and it's just all this kind of coming together, and you see then how like this art style evolves, how this Spider-Man evolved, all of this stuff. And again, it's such a great communication with it that it's just so rich. You can watch this movie and just look at the background details, and everything has a certain life to it, a certain gravity to it. And I love that. But it is also saying, like, hey, at the end of the day, if we are confined to believe the restraints of Spider Man, this film can't be interesting. In confiding ourselves in, like, in putting ourselves in a box, we are inherently telling a weaker story. And that's what we don't want to do. We want to tell our own story. So it is very meta in that nature. And what I also appreciated seeing this film a second time was the infinite amount of details. Just watching this movie for a second time, I found myself engrossed by the use of colors. I already kind of alluded to this in my non-spoiler review, but how this colors and styles are used to express each individual character. At the end of the film, they do this amazing trick with Gwen Stacy and her dad, Captain Stacy, where the colors are walled off. You see, like Gwen Stacy has her own colors, Captain Stacy has her own colors. And when the father finally accepts her for who she is, these true colors end up blending together. And conceptually, that's such an easy idea. We'd all think that. We're like, oh yeah, that's what it should do. And it seems so simple to do it, but to do it without drawing attention to it and just allowing it to exist to create atmosphere and to dictate storytelling cues was something that I was watching. I was just dumbfounded me. I'm like, oh my God, that's such an easy visual language that no filmmakers really get to do. No one's can really do it quite like these guys making these Spider-Verse movies can do. I was just so impressed and just everything about it. There were so many times watching this movie where I just wanted to pause the screen and just capture all the details because it is an art piece. It is a masterful art piece come to life. You could pause any of these frames, put them in any museum, and there's so much life, vibrance just to this, and so much storytelling. This is art at its most profound, at its most true, at its most provocative. And I loved it for this. The colors of this film are a story and they are a character within this film. Everything has life and meaning. And to do this, to blend all these animation styles, to just see it all come to fruition, I was just left aghast and by the beauty. Just can't even comprehend how incredible this film is. Across the Spider-Verse is just masterful. Oh my God, just so beautiful. And I've kind of given some of my big spoiler thoughts on this movie. Let's just talk about the Spot real quick because the Spot has this really great story connecting. He's the guy that is hit by the bagel in the first Into the Spider-Verse, which is a funny callback. But what Jason Schwartzman does so well in this movie is the menace. You feel really his growing just anxieties and evilness. And by the end of it, he's a very scary villain. As is Oscar Isaac as Spider-Man 2099. He really is the antagonist of this story through and through. And they explore Spider-Man 2099's past. And in this past, you see that basically the version of him in this other universe dies, so he goes to replace it and to be that version, Spider-Man 2099, but it ends up kind of destroying the universe. If you want an easy comparison, if you watched the first season of what's that Marvel What If, there's that episode where Doctor Strange messes with the multiverse and it collapses in on that self. That is essentially what happens to Spider-Man Noir in this film. In this universe, he basically just destroys this universe and kills his daughter and everyone on it. And it's this pretty heartfelt scene, and it's just this pretty tragic story. Uh, and you get all these moments, and it's just like what I loved about the Spider-Man Noir storyline is again Oscar Isaac. Oscar Isaac is a scene stealer in this movie, and again, his ideas really do talk about this canon idea that I just had. This all really works. Again, this mom dynamic that Miles Morales has in this movie, I just found exceptional. There's this scene where they are talking on the rooftop that I just found absolutely beautiful. Just oh my god, this dialogue, this protect the child in yourself, all of this. I was so moved by it. There's a scene right before where Gwen and Miles are having this conversation and the camera just moves in such an interesting way. We kind of flip for a second and they're walking upside down and sideways, and it's just this just great visual filmmaking. It's such a fun way to use the medium and to use shot making in this movie. uh One of the animation styles that I did want to touch on because I really got this I'm trying to think of the author of the book, but it's Meows. It has this kind of visual language with the spot where you see the tragedy unfolding, and it's kind of just again, I don't know if mouse is the correct term to use because I think there is a specific art style in place in this movie, but there is just this black and white imagery that feels a little scribbled. It feels actually Kurt Vonnegut. If you've ever read Slaughterhouse, what is Slaughterhouse 5? There's these little drawings that Vonnegut has throughout the books. And when watching this movie, I was very much feeling that Vonnegut style along with this mouse style, along with this kind of feels like Frank Miller to a degree. All these kind of influences in on the spot. You really get the tragedy of it and really tells the emptiness and longing of the spot story. And this all just really worked for me again in wonderful ways. And let's talk about some of the cameos in this film. This film has a plethora of them. So just off the top of my head, some of the ones I saw, obviously Spider-Man from the video game is in there. Miles Morales' roommate is actually specifically he is playing the Spider-Man PS5 video game. I saw Tom Holland's suit from Avengers Infinity War. The Iron Spider is in there in the background when they're in the Spider Society. That was a visual cue that I noticed. Obviously, you have Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield there through archival footage in the canon scene where you're seeing all the things. I think Kirsten Dunst then is also in that scene. You get all the Uncle Bens. I think you see briefly Tom Holland in that montage, but I'm not positive. Trying to think what are some of the other big ones that I saw visual representation to. Of course, there's Spider-Man from the TV show Spider-Man Spectacular. The Japanese Spider-Man is in there to a really funny effect. Peter parked car or whatever his name was, just really good comedy in there. I'm trying to think. There, one of my favorite thing is that the Spider-Mans they actually use the iterations of Spider-Man. So at times you see the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, you see the Romero era, you see the Todd McFarlane suits. You just see all these other ones. So it's also kind of just saying like, oh, this is the language of Spider-Man storytelling and how Spider-Man has evolved and how he has shifted and looked throughout that. You have other ones who are different interpretations. Obviously, Scarlet Spider, played by Andy Samberg, is used to really expert effects in this movie. Trying to think of some of the other Easter eggs that I noticed in this movie. Oh, obviously, you have the Doctor Strange just reference in this movie, uh, which is very clear. Thank you, love your fam, keep killing it. Spider Pig will be back. He is coming back. Obviously, that's a good one. That's an Easter egg. Not really an Easter egg, but Spider Ham and Spider-Man Noir are in this film. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that are just present throughout here. I know there's so many more. I saw there was a video where it's like 350 Spider-Man scenes, Easter eggs that you have to know about. I'm like 350. I was trying to catch so much. Lego Spider-Man voiced by Nick Novicki. This is really fun. This one's one of my favorite because it uses the Daily Bugle set from a few years ago, a set that I have. True story. I accidentally dropped that set and it still needs to be reassembled, but it literally uses the Daily Bugle. That's a fun callback to Phil Lord and Chris Miller literally directing the Lego movies. That's something obviously I very much enjoy. I love those Lego movies. So to have that cue, J.K. Simmons is in this movie. Apparently, in every multiverse, the one constant is that J. Jonah Jameson is voiced by J.K. Simmons. Love that. Trying to see who else is in here. I'm now pulling up some notes. Josh Keaton, who plays Spider-Man in the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show, is there. Yuri Lowenthal, who voices Peter Parker in the Insomniacs games. He's very much present in there. You see a few visual cues to the Spider-Man movie. Trying to think of some of the other ones. I'm just reading off a few of the top of my head, or not off the top of my head, just through a few through this list. Oh yeah, you obviously see Spider-Man from Spider-Man Unlimited Run, Marvel Mangaverse. Let's see, Spider Woman's obviously in there. Earth X. Oh my gosh, Spider Monkey, Spider Wolf, Peter Parker. That was one of my favorite ones that I already mentioned. The Mayday characters. Well, this one was a fun one. I didn't know this. Jack Quaid from The Boys, Huey from The Boys, voices Peter Parker in Gwen Stacy's universe. Let's see what else I'm missing. Oh my god, how am I forgetting some of these? Peggy Lou reprises her role as the convenience store owner from the Venom movies. This one was an absolutely fun one that I had a lot of. Like that this was an acknowledgement of it without being a true, just what's it called, having to shoehorn Tom Hardy or God forbid Jared Leto in this movie. I think there's a Jared Leto Morbius joke in the background that I want to re-see. I think it's somewhere in the when you first get to the Spider Society. I think you see a Morbius that is supposed to look like Jared Leto. I think it has like a funny, like almost like making fun of that Morbius movie. I have to rewatch that again to confirm that. But that one I really liked. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, Alfred Molina. Hello, Peter. There's again, it kind of looks like they are implying that Alfred Molina. There's versions. There's so many like fun jokes in there. The fact that it's a literal rhino instead of the rhino, that one's really fun. But let's talk about probably the biggest cameo, which I was thrilled with. Donald Glover, who portrays Aaron Davis in Spider-Man: Homecoming, is in this movie as the Prowler. He is caught apparently by Gwen Stacy and Punk Spider-Man. This is such a fun one because what I loved about this one is, of course, Donald Glover has this really like, history with Miles Morales. Basically, for those who don't not know this, I'm going to try explaining it as best as I can. Back when it was announced that Spider-Man 4 was not happening, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 was not happening, and they were going to reboot Spider-Man, there was this fan internet like kind of like rallying cry. This was kind of the first like internet like rallying cry that they wanted to get Donald Glover to play Spider-Man in a live action film. It gets so much that in the Community TV show in the opening of season 3, you see Donald Glover. He's wearing a Spider-Man pajamas, kind of a hinting at the fact of like this growing fan base wanting him to play it. Obviously, it doesn't happen. They choose Andrew Garfield, but then when it comes time to make this new Spider-Man in the comics, Miles Morales, they do base it on some of the personality of Childish Gambino slash Donald Glover, I should specifically mean. And then, of course, when Childish Gambino starts making his own raps, which again, if you don't know who Childish Gambino is, he is Donald Glover. He's the pseudonym for Donald Glover in his rap career. He's singing lyrics like he's talking directly about Spider-Man. He eventually gets the chance to voice Miles Morales in an animated show years later. But of course, when he gets cast in as Spider-Man Homecoming as Aaron, the uncle of Miles Morales, this is a nice little nod to the Miles Morales storyline, kind of a full circle moment where, yes, now he's too old to play Miles Morales, but now you have this moment where it's kind of just honoring the history of Miles Morales, how much Miles Morales' story is inspired by Donald Glover, how much Donald Glover seemingly has a love for the character of Spider-Man. And of course, we never really get it much of Donald Glover. In fact, we don't get any of Donald Glover in the MCU post Spider-Man Homecoming. This movie, you see him in the Prowler costume. It's this fun little Easter egg. It's kind of this full circle moment. I loved it. Love this cameo. It's again a cameo that doesn't it's very noticeable, but it didn't distract to the actual storytelling, and it wasn't like, oh, this is the moment you see this movie for. It's one of a million moments in this movie. But that is really largely some of my just big spoiler thoughts on this movie. I think this movie is going to do exceptionally well at the box office. It's already grossed 70 million opening weekend. I think it's projected to hit 120 plus domestic. This film's going to be big. I really hope to see this film get a billion. I really want to see more movies like this. But with that said, let's transition over to something. This is the last segment of this. Spider-Man movies ranked. And this is only going to be like 15 minutes. I did want to talk about it because now that I've talked infusively about Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse, I do want to take a second and just talk about all Spider-Man content and the films and their meaning in this. So let's just start. There's 13. That includes the Raimi trilogy, Mark Webb's True Films, the Watch trilogy, the MCU films. I'm not including the movies where Spider-Man is in them, but not really a central character. So films like Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, they're just fully out. Uh, I'm counting the Venom films. I'm counting Morbius. I'm counting the Spider-Verse films. So starting at 13, and this should be no surprise due to the quality of this film and the fact that this main actor is trying to convince everybody that he is still a good actor. And for some reason, Hollywood is still buying it. He's a really bad actor. He's a terrible human being. I don't like this guy for a lot of reasons, but it's Morbius. Jared Leto's really bad on this. It's a really lame hero to adapt. There's nothing interesting about this film. Bad special effects, lame direction throughout, lazy sequel setup. This film is so much more interested in setting up a Sinister Six movie with this pointless Michael Keaton cameo at the end. It feels like the movie is kind of grinding gears to eventually get there. It's so unoriginal. The plot is so cliched. It's poorly paced at an hour and 40. It feels like 2 hours and 30. There's nothing interesting about this film outside of Matt Smith, who almost understands the comedic stupidity of this film and is trying to make something good of this film, but ultimately Jared Leto just tanks this film. There's nothing interesting about his performance. This is a bad film. 1.1 star for me for Morbius. In case you don't remember my Morbius suckiest review, as I called it. Number 12 is Venom. And I should just state, Morbius is the only one I downright hate. These other movies I have moments of enjoyment with. And in Venom, I find this film to be trashy yet fun. Tom Hardy is clearly having a blast with this dual role. The humor works to pretty good effects. I find the film to be a little bit too funny, like it's a little bit too broad in its comedic sensibilities, but Tom Hardy is so committed to this role of playing both of them in this duality that it worked for me well enough. The villain is bad. They wasted Riz Ahmed. The special effects are horrible. This final third act where it's just these kind of two blobs fighting each other just looks really boring. But when you really are focusing in on the Venom dynamic, just Tom Hardy kind of just going 100% crazy, I actually do enjoy that aspect of the film. Like I said, the CGI fight scenes of this movie are terrible. This film does the ultimate sin where it just wastes the great actress in Michelle Williams, as this is a sequel. She's just completely wasted in this film, though it does lead to one really sexy kiss where she is female Venom kissing Tom Hardy. It's pretty hot. I will not lie. I do like that scene. Uh, that's dumb. That's a really dumb joke to make. I do apologize, but it is like the only scene that Michelle Williams gets in that film. Number 11 is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Here's the thing. I defend this movie due to the excellent romantic chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, but it's not a good movie. This film struggles with the three villains, and none of them are intimidating. You have, off the top of my head, you have Electro played by Jamie Foxx, Green Goblin played by Dane DeHaan, who I've always said is not a good actor, and time has seemed to bear that truth to existence. And you have, I believe it's Paul Giamatti who plays the Rhino. I believe it's Giamatti in this role. None of them are good. Dane DeHaan is a bad actor. Mark Webb, as the director of this film, just struggles with the cinematic aspects of this movie. But this is also the guy who directed 500 Days of Summer. He does understand the visual cues of romance in this film, thus the relationship and the interpersonal relationship between Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker actually shines in this film to really great effects. Again, I don't necessarily love how this movie looks, but I do love Andrew Garfield in the role. He does embody Spider-Man to really good effects in it. Some of the lines he has, some of the just caringness he has in this role. there's this weird subplot in both these Amazing Spider-Man films where it's Peter's parents are they're working for like the CIA or something. We spend like a good amount of time focused on this, but the ending of this film is legitimately great. The Gwen Stacy recreation of her death from Spider-Man 129, I did just find really moving. It really works. Andrew Garfield really sells this movie. There is just a lot to like about this movie. It's just the fact that the villains goes nowhere. This film kind of is just churning its wheels, but it doesn't really ever find traction. But there are things to be liked about this movie. Coming in at number 10, sorry, I need a water break. Coming in at number 10 is Venom Let There Be Carnage. First off, I just want to say that Woody Harrelson in this movie is just a bizarre casting. He has the stupidest like Annie wig on of this red hair. It looks so comedically over the top, as is the rest of the movie. And that's kind of why I kind of give this movie a pass. It's 90 minutes and it just kind of flies by. And I just was left this movie just kind of just on board for what it was. It is so Tom Hardy and Woody Harrelson chewing the scenery. It doesn't really make any logical sense. I don't really remember scenes of this movie. I remember the beginning to be a little self-serious with this carnage, his like girlfriend being killed. I don't like any of that, but I do like that this completely over the top nature about it. It's kind of stupidity and chaos just encompassed in this movie. Andy Serkis, the guy who plays Gollum, and Caesar, and just this amazing actor directs this movie for some reason. I didn't know he even had an interest in directing, and he hasn't, from my understanding, I don't think he's directed a movie since. I think he's directed two films. He's directed that Mowgli movie from the Jungle Book that went to Netflix a few years ago. I believe he's director of this, and he directed this movie. Doesn't really need to be directed by him. Actually, in fact, he might have been a better Carnage than Woody Harrelson. But I can't really say anything negative about this movie. Watching this movie for 90 minutes, I'm like, okay, this is fun. I'm having fun with this movie. I can't say it's great, but I had fun watching this. And for 90 minutes, it's just a perfect amount of stupidity and chaos. I kind of was able to turn my brain off and just have a blast with this movie, weirdly enough. And it's just, again, it's so trashy, but it's trashy in a fun way. And I was just able to respect that, and that Tom Hardy is fully going. If Tom Hardy's at a 10 in the first movie, he's at like a 20 in the second movie. He's a lot of fun in this role. The stupid like setup for them being into No Way Home is really dumb, because it's just a post-credit scene that really all it's setting up is that the symbiote now exists in Tom Holland's world. You could have done it in a more interesting way. It's a stupid post-credit scene, and it feels like it's going to be more impactful. I don't think we'll ever see those two characters interact. Coming in at number 9 is The Amazing Spider-Man. The most memorable part of this movie is the romantic chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. I like the Captain Stacy storyline. Weirdly enough, when this movie came out in 2012, I was on a huge Dennis Leary kick for some reason, and I really liked him as Captain Stacy. Uh, I already talked about how Mark Webb's talents as a director don't necessarily lend themselves to Spider-Man cinematically, but it does lend itself to the interpersonal relationships that Spider-Man has in this film. Uh, there is this nature of it where I do find Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker to be a little bit too stalkerish to Emma Stone, so I don't necessarily like how they get together in this film. It doesn't feel as natural as it does in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but their chemistry really sells this. I think he captures the duality of Spidey in this movie, in the sense that you really do feel the difference of Peter Parker and Spider-Man in this film. Uh, Specifically with the humor, the romance, and Spidey's heroism in this film. One of my favorite scenes is the scene where he saves the kid from the falling bridge, giving him the mask. It's a The cranes at the end where they're all helping out Spider-Man. It's one of my favorite moments within Spider-Man history. I don't love the look of Peter Parker in this film. I don't like this skater aesthetic that Mark Webb decides to use with this movie. And I think the tone of the movie is very scatterbrained, very serious at times, very funny at times. It all kind of feels a little disconnected. And I don't think this movie does enough to distinguish itself from Raimi's. And specifically, it kind of feels like a retread of the first Spider-Man movie directed by Sam Raimi, except they had this dumb subplot, which I already mentioned, with Peter Parker's parents. But overall, I do have fun with this movie. I think there are things to like about this movie. It's just never really warrants its existence, but I do like, you see the potential of Andrew Garfield being a great Peter Parker slash Spider-Man. It's just the film never gets there quite with him. Coming in at number 8, this one's actually grown in my appreciation, as has this whole trilogy. It's Spider-Man 3. And listen, I'll just acknowledge this. The plot is a mess in this movie, but I actually do find the story to be rich. It's just the plot itself is kind of just all over the place. It's Spider-Man at his heights and thus his hubris, and it's an exploration of grudges, generational trauma, trying to overcome your past. That's really the Harry storyline of this. I don't think James Franco is good in any of these movies, to be honest. I like Tobey Maguire a lot in this movie specifically. Uh, and I think this film looks great. I think what Sam Raimi is really good at is he's a really good visual storyteller, and his movies look exceptional. I think this movie is no exception. I think this movie looks quite good. Uh, Obviously, there's this meme-ness of this movie, which has been now meme to death, the emo Spider-Man. Here's what I will say: this movie is playing it completely self-aware. This is intentionally funny. The scene where Eddie Brock is in the church praying for Spider-Man's death, or sorry, Peter Parker's death, is so obviously comedic. It does suffer from too many villains, and James Franco, who again I just don't think is good in this role at all, and specifically his Harry Osborn, that storyline doesn't work. But there is a lot of just rich storytelling themes of this movie. I really do like this idea of getting to see Peter Parker not struggle, but just struggle with almost his self image, his relationship with MJ, kind of being kicked down. It really does work for me. Him in the black suit works to really good effects. There is a lot to like about this movie. It never really comes together. Again, it's the weakest of this trilogy, but there are moments to really like in this film. And I think it does require an actually exceptional performance from Tobey Maguire that's kind of overlooked now just due to the memes of it. Coming in at number 7, I have this film much lower than a lot of other people have. It's the first installment of Spider-Man within the MCU, Spider-Man Homecoming. And let's just straight up say this is a 3 out of 5 star movie for me. I like this movie, but it does feel off for me. Something about this movie doesn't necessarily gel for me. I don't love how it looks, and this is one of my biggest issue with the John Watts films. They look very generic. I don't like the humor in certain sequences. There are just jokes in this movie that I find a little bit just too annoying or too poppy or too jokey, which is kind of weird in a Spider-Man film, but it is like very like kiddish at times, and it just like there are moments of it where the humor just completely loses me on the film, and I find it more annoying than funny. Uh, Keaton is good in this movie. Michael Keaton is really good as the Vulture, but the problem is I like him more as Adrian than in the actual costume. When he's in the costume, I do find boring. I find this film to be very weightless in its gravity. Like there are just scenes of this film where I just don't really love how this film looks. Like again, watching the Raimi films recently, you notice the crashes, you notice the explosions, you notice like the impact of everything. In this, it just kind of feels weightless throughout, and it's just one of my big issues with Watts as a director. Again, I think he directs the story of the movie very well. It's just he doesn't have an eye for the cinematic nature of Spider-Man storytelling. And that is a downfall of this movie. And I think it's most noticeable. I do think as the film goes on, his skills do improve. Again, I'm not going to put him at the height of maybe Sam Raimi or some other the directors within the Marvel Cinematic Universe or in superhero storytelling in general, but I do think he does improve. Specifically in my next entry, which is number 6, which is Spider-Man Far From Home, which is unlike where I dislike Spider-Man Homecoming a little bit more than other people. I actually really overvalue Far From Home more than most people. I seem to be more on the positive on this movie than some people. And what I do love about this movie is Mysterio. Mysterio is the movie to me, and John Watts, what he is able to capture so well about Mysterio is the cinematic nature of this movie. The scene where you see the hundreds of Mysterio walking through, you see these illusions, these grandeur of the Mysterio character. That really works for me. And I love that this story is really Peter trying to get the girl. I love MJ having a bigger role in this movie. In the first movie, I was very confused by the MJ decision within this film to not really focus it on her thing and to introduce MJ in the second film. I I really like this movie for just the MJ relationship, have her having a bigger role. I think Mysterio again lends himself to the big screen. I think this is a movie about Endgame and like trying to overcome the death of Tony Stark and him trying to become his own person. And I like how it follows up Endgame in a very respectable way. And like I said, I think Tom Holland grows with each role. Some storylines I don't necessarily vibe with. The Ned romance I actually do find quite funny. I do think the jokes work in this. I don't love the Nick Fury storyline throughout this. I do think the Nick Fury just part with Maria Hill is just all kind of wasted. But overall, I really do just like this movie, and it is really just centered around Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. I think the ending is just exceptional. I lost my mind when you saw J.K. Simmons in this. I really had a fun time with this movie. I don't think it's as bad as many people say it is. Coming in at number 5 for me is a movie that's actually slightly dropped, but more because some of the other films I've seen have actually grown in my appreciation, and that's Spider-Man 2002, the first Sam Raimi film. And here's the thing, I have an emotional attachment to this film. I have just scenes from this movie, beats from this movie just completely memorized. I just know this movie inside and out. Defoe is kind of the quintessential Spider-Man villain for me, and he's when I think of the live action Spider-Man villains, he's who I think of first. I just even as dumb as the costume looks, I like him in this role. Uh New York looks so lively in this film. Sam Raimi has such an eye for the cinematic of this film. This web swinging, there's just so many shots of just how the camera moves that it's just the camera becomes a character, as the camera always becomes a character in Sam Raimi films. The camera becomes a character in this. I love that Sam Raimi translates his horror vibes into this. I think that works so well when you have an actor like Willem Dafoe who is so expressive in his face. You just really get some really disturbing visual cues in this movie. There's a jump scare in this movie, like somewhere pretty in the middle that still scares me. It still actually gives me goosebumps thinking about. And to be honest, when I think Spider-Man movies, this is still the movie that I think of. This is the first Spider-Man movie I ever saw. This is one of the earliest movies I remember actually ever seeing. And I love this film for that. It is just the case of there's now been films that have been done better than this, but I still just have an appreciation for this film and a love for this. I think Kirsten Dunst is good in this movie. I think Tobey Maguire again grows. I think he's best in Spider-Man 2. James Franco is probably the best he's been of the three, but again, I think he's miscast as Harry Osborn in this film. Coming in at number 4, this one was a hard one. I switched back and forth, but ultimately, after rewatching one of these films today, I decided I'm going to put that one above this one. And thus, coming in at number 4 is Spider Man No Way Home, a movie I love. Just like before we go into number 4, I know it sounds a little lower than some of these other movies. I love Spider Man No Way Home. And listen, John Watts does have this airless nature in his direction where I've said it. I don't necessarily like how these MCU films look. They don't always look cinematic. That can be really clear in the first half of this movie where there's just scenes of New York where they just don't feel lived in. You can really feel the back lot studio of this film, the backdrop of it. It feels very CGI in scenes. What this movie does so well is the second half of this movie, and that's where this movie really climbs in my appreciation for it. Obviously, having all three of the Spider-Man, I think it actually does lend itself in a way that doesn't feel. Here's the thing: this film is clearly building off the success of Into the Spider-Verse, and they're like, "Oh, what if we can do this?" I don't think if Into the Spider-Verse was as big of a deal as it was, I don't think we actually get this movie. I think they do reshape this movie in honor of the success that Into the Spider-Verse found. But I do really like the Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire edition from this movie. And I do think they don't distract from Tom Holland. This does feel like a Tom Holland story. The death of MJ, sorry, not the death of MJ, sorry, the death of Aunt May, all this kind of his origin story, him coming to be Spider-Man, him by the end of this being the Spider-Man, the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that we truly know, a broke kid trying to make it through this world. That all really worked for me. Again, it's this issue of this movie and why it drops a little bit lower for me is I know how Spider-Man uh I know the beats of this movie very well, is what I should actually say. And the reason I watched this movie is the second half of this movie. The first half I don't really revisit. The Doctor Strange stuff is good, but it's not like anything particularly memorable. It's when it all kind of comes together, when you get the Sinister Sticks, when you get them all together when you get the Spider-Man, that's when this movie really sings, and I think it's really special. Coming in at number 3 then is the best of the live action Spider-Man movies. It should be obvious if I just said that, but that is Spider-Man 2. When I was watching this movie, so I always really undervalued Spider-Man 2. And what's so great about this movie, specifically, is the cinematic language that Sam Raimi is working with. This might be his best directed film in terms of looks. There's one sequence in this film where you see Spider-Man swinging, and then you see it in the reflection of Doc Ock's glasses, and it's this just beautiful transition. There's so much of this. Again, the camera, like in Spider-Man 1 and 3, is a character within this film. Just so much about this movie. This movie hits me on a really emotional core. This is Spider-Man being beat down and beat down and beat down, and yet he still succeeds in being the Spider-Man movie. This movie just starts with him getting his ass kicked in the sense that he is Peter Parker and he gets fired from his job as a pizza delivery boy. He is not making money. He needs money desperately, and he's never getting it. And just in all of that, there's just this nature of Peter Parker. And I always used to criticize that I never found Tobey Maguire funny. These movies are actually quite funny. There is a great just humor that Sam Raimi is able to infuse in this movie. I think I've given Tobey Maguire a little bit too much crap in the past. He is good and he does do that dual role very well. But what makes the film memorable are sequences, the character relationships in this movie. As I always say, that's one of the most important things about Spider-Man. Uh, Specifically, some of the scenes. I love the scene where uh, the landlord's daughter offers Spider-Man a piece of cake, just this little act of kindness. I love the scene with Aunt May and Peter Parker, and Peter Parker's telling her that he was there the night Ben was killed and it was his fault, and then May's forgiveness of it later on in the movie. The Doc Ock always trying to do better. Doc Ock sacrificing himself at the end. These conversations that he has with MJ. The final shot of MJ. The movie Spider-Man 2 ends with MJ for a very specific reason. And it's her kind of accepting like her role in all of this and just what is going to essentially happen to her. Like she now realizes it's a sense of danger. And the story is to some degree MJ's story as well as it is Peter Parker's, and their relationship is so well explored in this movie. Again, Harry Osborn is rough in this movie. I've already iterated I don't like James Franco in this role. Doc Ock is a really exceptional villain. There are a few scenes in this movie that legitimately make me cry. Two of the ones that just break me are obviously the one that everyone thinks of is the train sequence where he saves the train. They lift his body and they're looking at Peter and they're like, he's a kid. He could be my kid. Like that scene, and then the mask, and then them all rallying around him and saying, we'll keep your identity safe. The kid's giving the mask. I'm tearing up thinking about that scene. And then like when Doc Ock comes on the train and they're all standing in front, basically, if you're not getting to Spider-Man without going through us, my God, that movie's so beautiful. The scene that I kind of forgot about the scene, but it's such a great scene. It's after he's kind of given up the role of Spider-Man. He sees the burning house and it puts him back into action. It's just the heroism of Spider-Man. It's just in his blood. That's what makes Peter Parker, is that he kind of just can't sit and see this happening. He has to put the sacrifice in. And the scene where he saves the little child, he gives the child, he walks away without a moment's notice. And then this next scene where they're just like, the cops or the firefighters are talking and they're like, this guy died in the building. It's just such a throwaway line, but you just kind of see the impact that has on Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And maybe he's thinking like, could I have done more? Could I have done more? It's so just all expertly achieved. I love this film. I really did just vibe with this movie so well. And it's maybe because I've been studying Sam Raimi for the past year and I've really grown in my appreciation for his love for him. Number 2 on my list is at this moment Across the Spider-Verse. For all the reasons I just mentioned, I think this film is masterful. I think it's a 5-star movie. Just everything about this movie really works. The only reason it is not number one, and again, I'm not talking about Across the Spider Verse in any more detail. If you want to watch that, you can either watch the other video or watch the beginning of this hour conversation. Number one, though, is the movie that I called the movie of the 2010s decade. My favorite movie to come out of that decade is Into the Spider-Verse. So many reasons that this film is brilliant. The comedy of this film, John Mulaney, Nicolas Cage really just bringing it. The story, What's Up Danger, that drop, the leap of faith is one of the best moments of this film, just of film making ever. Just point blank. The music works so brilliantly in this film. The needle drops are fantastic. But also what this movie works about is every character feels fully realized. I love this moment with Jake Johnson voicing Peter B. Parker, where he's talking about his past and how MJ and him have separated. And it's this line that Jake Johnson delivers so beautifully where he's like, she wanted to have kids and I was scared. And that's all you really need to know about that character. And it's just so emotionally impactful. So many of the scenes in this movie are emotionally impactful, and it's just casting talented actors like Mahershala Ali is a credit to this movie. It lends itself. So when the Prowler dies in this movie and he's Spider-Man, you're the best of all of us. Or Miles, you're the best of all of us. It's just so much of it just works to such beautiful effect. I love the villain in this movie, Kingpin, and specifically Liv Octavius, voiced by Catherine Hahn, who I think is exceptional in this role. Just all of this film is a visual language of itself. It's groundbreaking to me, and I just didn't know a film could do what this film does until I saw it. And I just will never, I don't think Across the Spider-Verse can touch this because I can't get over seeing this film for the first time. And that's my relationship with this movie. And I love Into the Spider-Verse as I love Across the Spider-Verse, but it's just, this movie's so special to me. And I don't know if you can ever replace that excitedness I had from watching this movie for the first time. Anyway, thank you all for joining me for this long live video. I'm sure I'll have more thoughts about this all coming up. I'll be posting these videos in segments. So if you just want to watch the non-spoiler review, the spoiler review, or the rankings, you can. Anyway, all, my name is Ben Friedman here from the Beniverse. If you like this movie, make sure to follow me on Beniverse.media on TikTok. Please, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching. Take care. And where's my pen? Where's my pen so I can do the thing? I don't know where one is. Here we go. Take care and